Hello, welcome back to Learn Economia. In this video, we are going to answer a very important question. Is Indian economy going through the path of Sri Lanka? We know what is happening in Sri Lanka, the kind of problems, especially when it comes to economic problems. We know what is happening in Sri Lanka. So, is Indian economy is moving in a similar way to a recession kind of a situation? So let's answer these questions in this video. Welcome back to Learn Economia. We know that after the pandemic of COVID-19, not only India but also the world economy has been affected very much in the sense that all the sectors, not even a single sector could be spared. All the sectors were equally affected. Some of the sectors were affected very much. In-depth problems were caused in some sectors, whereas in the case of some other sectors there were problems, but it could be handled to an extent. So when it came to the first wave of COVID pandemic, there was a nationwide lockdown in the case of India. Not only this was happened in India, the world economy itself was shut down. So there was some restrictions. There was restriction with respect to movement of people across countries. From one country to another country, people were not allowed to go. Even from one city to another city, people were not allowed to go. So we know what had happened a few months ago, right? So this kind of lockdown had its implications upon the production, distribution, growth, everything, right? So lockdown was imposed. Why it was imposed is, we know it was to curb the spread of disease. And India saw one of the deepest recessions in the world, with its GDP declined as much as 23.8 in the fiscal 2021 quarter one. Coming to the Reserve Bank of India, what the Reserve Bank, the central bank of our country, has done is that the Reserve Bank has opted for a loose monetary policy in order to support growth. Coming to the external issues, there were many external issues. So the inflation crept very quietly, even as the economic recovery remained very patchy. So as a result, this was making a way for a rise in the household inflation expectations. Coming to another important reason, you can see that the commodity prices, it began increasing. So there were some supply side issues as well, which were created during the pandemic. And coming to the role of India, coming to the case of India, the role of inflation expectation is very much important. We know how the crude oil prices has been increasing day by day. The petrol price, the diesel price, everything. Even though the government has made an attempt in just a few days ago to reduce the fuel prices to curb inflation, still people are suffering a lot as a result of food inflation, fuel inflation, etc. Fuel inflation was a little bit, it could be reduced to an extent, but that was not that much. That cannot be considered as enough for the people. Analysts feel that a recent move by the RBI Governor Shaktikanta Das to prioritize inflation over growth has meant that policy normalization has commenced in India. In April of 2022, the Reserve Bank of India has compared the present situation of India with that of 1970s. So this is what is told by Shaktikanta Das. He says that although the situation of today is significantly different from the oil shocks of the 70s, the energy markets are global and prices waves find their way around the world. We could see that the household spending is, it has very much affected as a result of recession. So recession as such has not come to India now, but we are actually moving towards a kind of recession like situation has been something which is presently faced by the Indian economy. Coming to the present situation of Indian economy, we could see that not only India but also all the economies around the world are battling as a result of the geopolitical crisis as well as the COVID pandemic. As a result of the war caused between the Russian as well as Ukraine armies, there were many other problems which happened as a result of these war. So the crisis has actually weighed upon the countries at a time when the global supply chains were very much impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. If you look into the tourism sector, if you look into the foreign trade sector, we know that all these sectors were very much badly affected as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. And so it was actually a shock of a shock that the world was facing when the Ukraine and Russia went for a war. These countries were exporting to many other countries. These countries are getting imports from many other countries. So as a result of these war, the war between Ukraine and Russia, import export were very much badly affected. India relies heavily on imports of sunflower oil for domestic food supplies, and also India is a major importer from Russia, and also India is actually exporting to many countries, and this too was badly affected as a result of both COVID-19 pandemic and the war between Russia and Ukraine. Coming to the case of Sri Lanka, we know that the turmoil which happened in Sri Lanka, or which has been continuing in Sri Lanka, uh, uh, so the increased inflation and the plummeting currency, economic crisis, everything in Sri Lanka is actually something which was to an extent happened as a result of mismanagement in government. The island nation fell into a default for the first time in the history of that particular nation. The shortage of fuel had led to long queues at petrol pumps. Ranil Wickremesinghe, he was named prime minister some weeks ago. After this, Mahindra Rajapakse resigned from his post. We know how Mahindra Rajapakse has helped the Sri Lankan economy to deal with many problems, but this person, Mahindra Rajapakse, was enjoying huge support from Sri Lankan civilians, but now the Sri Lankan civilians has turned against this Mahindra Rajapakse as a result of a single policy taken by this person. Now Wickremesinghe has said that he planned to ask for foreign assistance, privatize Sri Lankan Airlines, and also he seeks parliamentary approval to increase the treasury bill insurance. For a short period, he says that their future will be even more difficult than tough times that have already passed. Now, having looked into what Indian economy and what Sri Lankan economy have been facing, let's see, is there anything similar between India and Sri Lanka? India has not been spared from the global shocks, and Sri Lanka too had been experiencing global shocks. Right. So, if you look into a recent report published by the United Nations, India is projected to grow by 6.4% in 2022. The growth pace is surely it is slower than the previous years, and previous year it was 8.8%. And the State of Economy report released by the Reserve Bank of India, what the Governor of the Reserve Bank, Shaktikant Das, is telling is that the central bank's accommodative stance and timely monetary policy announcements. This will be something which continues to foster the congenial financial conditions to support growth and mitigate adverse effects of geopolitical crisis. So, as per him, this would be helping the economy to come out of the situation of shock. And we are trying a lot to re-establish or re-stabilize the economic activity in our domestic affairs. I mean, we're coming to the domestic production, domestic distribution, domestic consumption, all these kinds of things. We are trying to stabilize production, distribution, everything. Even though the global prices are increasing, especially when it comes to key commodities, the Reserve Bank has taken note that inflation is going to remain elevated. As a result, we have to go for some prioritization. We have to prioritize inflation. Our prioritization should be on taming inflation first of all, rather than giving importance to growth. At least for this period, at least for this time, or for the time being, what we have to do is that we have to tame inflation. Even amid all the challenges, India has managed to extend a helping hand to Sri Lanka. India is telling that India will be helping Sri Lanka by offering some grants to Sri Lanka, some aids to Sri Lanka. So recently it is extended, what India has done is that India has extended an additional credit of $200 million to replenish Sri Lanka's rapidly depleting fuel stocks. So also it has provided $1.9 billion in swaps and credit lines. Also with respect to shipments, we are helping Sri Lanka. Coming to the stand of India in comparison to Sri Lanka, I mean, where does India stand when we compare India and Sri Lanka? In that case, we can see that both of these nations have their own economic challenges, which are to an extent separate from each other. While India is a far better position, India is comparatively in a better position when it comes to global challenges. Sri Lanka is suffering a lot, especially it is suffering from within. Internal problems are very much affecting Sri Lanka right now. So in that sense, India is a bit free. The number of challenges faced by India is in that sense less. But definitely India is facing a lot of challenges when it comes to international economy. Moving to the concept of economic growth, and if you compare India and Sri Lanka on the basis of economic growth, you can see that Sri Lanka, it is an emerging market economy. The average growth rate here is 6.2%, and this was a growth rate between 2010 and 2016. In the next 3 years, the growth rate had dropped to 3.1%. And it is saying that coming to the World Bank, it has forecasted that the economy will grow 2.4% from this year, from 2021. Okay. And we don't know what will happen after this crisis. Now this crisis is going on in Sri Lanka, and we don't know whether this growth rate could be maintained, or whether in the future this is something that is still a question. It is very much unlikely for Sri Lanka to maintain this growth. That means that Sri Lanka is actually going to a worse situation, right? So in the case of India, on the other hand, India has been in a state of recovery. Yes, recovering from the pandemic, and the pace in which India recovers is considered to be very fast. Okay, the fast recovery is happening with respect to India, while the International Monetary Fund, it has projected that India would be growing by 8.2% in the fiscal year of 2023. And the Reserve Bank of India has slashed its economic growth to 7.2%. But then the cut is on the account of the volatile crude oil prices, and also there are some supply chain disruptions as a result of Ukraine Russia war. So moving to the case of inflation, if you compare the inflation case of India and Sri Lanka, you can see that so inflation is in record high for Sri Lanka. The figure is very much above the central bank's target range of 4 to 6%. And the food prices have become skyrocketed. It is 46.6%. Fuel prices, it is increasing frequently in Sri Lanka. And in the case of India, commodity prices are increasing. Inflation is very much quite high, but still it is lower than Sri Lanka, than what is experienced in Sri Lanka. Fuel prices is also, it is increasing. Moving to WPI, or the Wholesale Price Index, the April number is the highest in the shade over 9 years in the current series. And and the CPI is also actually increasing in India. The policy rate, we know that if you compare CRR, MSF, all these things of India and Sri Lanka, the Sri Lankan central bank has raised the interest rate as a result of increased inflationary pressures. Bank rate has jumped from 9% to 17.5%. So, and also the lending rate is 19.36 in May. uh, in total, we could see that the Sri Lankan central bank has hiked all the interest rate. Okay, this is to tame inflation. And moving to the case of India, the Reserve Bank had gone for taming inflation. Inflation concerns when it has become intensified. RBI hiked the repo rate. The standing deposit facility rates were adjusted to 4.15%, and then the marginal standing facility rate has been changed. The Reserve Bank also hiked the cash reserve ratio by 50 basis points, and now it is 4.5% effective from May 21. It has become effective from May 21. Owing to the Forex reserve, taking it as the basis of comparison of India with Sri Lanka or Sri Lanka with India. In the case of Sri Lanka, the finance ministry says that the country would currently has only $25 million in unusable foreign reserves. So their foreign reserves are depleting, right? The country is actually pleading for foreign help. The country's total foreign debt has been increasing. The central bank has decided to lower the limit of foreign currency a person can hold. And now, in the case of India, that the forex reserve has been falling. Foreign exchange reserves have declined by 28.05 billion. In the previous reporting week, the overall reserves had declined to $597.728 billion. Okay, so in both the countries, similar situation would be seen. Um, when it comes to foreign debt and all, that means both are increasing to both are moving in one direction. I'm not telling that extent to which the foreign debt is increasing is the same. Coming to the foreign direct investment, the case of Sri Lanka is that FDI remained modest for both 2020 and half of 2021, first half of 2021. In the case of Sri Lanka, during 2010 to 2019 period, the maximum FDI in the case of Sri Lanka was received from China. Now, in the case of India, services and manufacturing sector accounted for the major FDI equity inflows, and India remained an attractive destination. This is mainly because of the policies like Atmanirbhar Bharat taken by the present government. And I am not telling that I'm not supporting any political party, but I'm telling that the policies taken by different governments, including the one taken by the present government like Atmanirbhar Bharat, Make in India kind of thing. So these are actually helping a country to grow. When these are helping a country to get investment. And also, you might be knowing about masala bonds kinds of things. So these would be actually helping a country to gain investments from abroad. Coming to the fiscal position and comparing Sri Lanka with India on the basis of this, Sri Lanka's trade deficit has widened. Okay, and its remittances has declined, and the country is facing a fiscal deficit. Fiscal deficit is very much increasing in Sri Lanka, and India's fiscal deficit India's current account deficit has also widened. Its fiscal deficit worked out to be 58.9% of the annual budget. And the fiscal deficit, we know that it's a difference between total revenue and total expenditure of the government. As a result, what the government does is that if the revenue is less than expenditure, or if the expenditure is more than the revenue, what the government does is the government goes for borrowing. Coming to the value of currency of India and Sri Lanka, the Sri Lankan currency has been the worst performing currencies now, because this is mainly because of the internal problems happening in Sri Lanka. Coming to the case of India's rupee, it has closed at a record loss in four of the previous 5 sessions. So both the countries are declining. I mean, the value of the not only Sri Lankan currency but also Indian rupee is declining, but it is more declining when in the case of Sri Lankan currency, especially due to the internal problems. Moving to the stock market, in the case of Sri Lanka, the Colombian Stock Exchange has announced a 5-day trading halt after central bank hiked the interest rate. The BSE and Industry in India, these have been under pressure, mainly due to the weak sentiments of the global market. The broader NSE Nifty has fallen about 2.6% in the last 3 months. So that's all for today. I request you to like, share, and subscribe to this channel for more videos, and you can be a part of my Telegram group and Telegram channel to discuss your doubts. That's all for today. Thank you. I'll be providing the links of the Telegram group and Telegram channel in the description box.